30 guns that lived behind every American door. Until the year that erased them. In November of 1963, a man bought a rifle through the mail for $19.95. He saw the ad in a gun magazine and mailed it in under a fake name. No background check, no waiting period, no questions asked. That rifle ended a presidency. In September of 2025, federal agents stood in a Utah field staring at another mail-order era rifle. Once so old, it carried no serial number at all, because the law didn't require one yet when it was built. Two old guns, 6 decades apart, and the same reason they both still mattered. For most of American history, you could arm a household the same casual way you ordered a hammer or a winter coat. This list is 30 of those guns, the ones that loaded the nightstand drawers and the closets behind the kitchen door for 100 years before nearly vanishing completely. Number 3 once outsold every other handgun design ever made. Number 1 was, for decades, the single most common firearm inside an American home, until one law and one shift in taste erased it almost overnight. Hit subscribe, because there's a real chance your own grandfather owned at least 3 of these without ever thinking of them as remarkable. Let's start at the bottom, with number 30. Number 30 is the Hopkins Allen XL revolver, the gun that armed working-class America before working-class America could afford anything finer. Built in Norwich, Connecticut, these plain top-break and solid-frame revolvers sold through hardware stores and catalogs for $2 or $3, cheap enough for a mill worker to buy on a single payday. Chambered in modest calibers like .32 and .38, with no frills triggers and zero decoration. This was a tool, not a trophy. A widow kept one folded into her apron pocket. The bluing wore off fast, but the gun fired when it had to, and asked for nothing in return. When the company collapsed around 1917, swallowed by the chaos of wartime manufacturing, the formula for the truly cheap American home revolver started disappearing with it. Today these turn up at estate sales completely unrecognized. But Hopkins Allen wasn't the only workshop quietly arming half the country for pocket change. Through the late 1800s, small Massachusetts and Connecticut shops, names like Forehand and Wadsworth and Hood Firearms, built hundreds of thousands of stubby 5-shot pocket revolvers, bird's head grips, short barrels, chambered in .32 or .38, selling for less than $1.50. Cowboys carried them as backup, tucked into a boot. Collectors later hung an unkind nickname on this whole category of guns, one tied to the saddest possible ending, and ugly enough that this script won't repeat it. But the families who owned them never saw it that way. They saw a fighting chance for the price of a chicken dinner. When buyers eventually wanted quality over quantity, these little guns slid into junk drawers across the country, and today, that old nickname is mostly all that's left of them. Then there was the Remington Model 95 Double Derringer, the gambler's insurance, and for a traveling woman alone after dark, sometimes the final word in an argument. 2 barrels stacked one over the other, chambered in a soft point .41 rimfire round, small enough to disappear inside a vest pocket. Remington built almost 150,000 between 1866 and 1935, riding the riverboats, the card tables, and the night trains of a country still being settled. A man tucked one behind his watch chain for the dark stretch home. When Remington shut the line down during the Depression, replaced by flatter, higher-capacity semi-automatics, The little over-under became a relic almost overnight, and today it survives mostly as a movie prop. Number 27 is the Stevens favorite, and there's a real argument that no single firearm taught more of rural America how to shoot. A single-shot .22 with a falling block action, light as a fishing rod and accurate enough to clip a squirrel off a high branch. J. Stevens Arms sold these by the wagon load from 1894 into the 1930s for around $6, cheap enough that a father could buy one for every son under his roof. It lived on a nail by the back door, ready for trouble, and in a real pinch, it was the family's only voice in the dark. Whole generations learned patience with the favorite balanced across their knees, and when mass-produced repeaters made single shots feel old-fashioned, the little gun faded out. Number 26 rarely makes lists like this one, and it deserves better. The Remington Model 51, designed by engineer John Peterson and released around the First World War. It was a slim semi-automatic pocket pistol in .3, .2 and .380, and it was considered one of the best engineered pocket pistols of its day, smoother than almost anything Colt was selling. The problem wasn't the gun, it was timing. Remington's factories were buried under wartime contracts at launch. Real volume never arrived, and by the time the company refocused, Colt's model 1903 already owned the pocket pistol market. Remington pulled the plug after roughly 65,000 units, and one of the finest small pistols ever designed in America simply disappeared. The Savage model. 1907 was the future arriving early, and it knew it. While most families still trusted a plain revolver, Savage offered a slim semi-automatic in .32 caliber, holding 10 rounds when 6 was standard, advertised simply as 10 shots quick, with Wild West legend Bat Masterson paid to back it. The grip raked back naturally and slid into a coat pocket without printing a bulge, real sophistication for a modern household in 1910. But the round was modest and the mechanism complicated, and by the 1920s, sleeker pistols pushed the gun that once symbolized progress into obscurity. Number 24 is the Harrington and Richardson Young America, the starter gun for an entire household. A tiny top-break revolver in .22 or .32. It broke open at the hinge, so even a nervous first-time owner could load it safely on the kitchen table. H&R sold them for decades, just a few dollars each, ending up inside more American homes than almost anything else of their kind. It wasn't powerful, and it wasn't pretty, but it was honest, and it gave a household exactly one thing that mattered, a reason for an intruder to think twice. The Young America did its job quietly for 50 years, and then the cheap home revolver fell out of fashion at almost the same moment it fell out of the law's good graces. Number 23 is the Marlin Model 39, and this one has a strange twist nobody saw coming. A lever-action .22 rimfire dating back to 1891, refined into the Model 39A. It earned a reputation as one of the smoothest, most accurate .22s ever built. The rifle a father bought once, and 3 generations later, his grandson was still hunting squirrels with the same gun. For decades, it sat by the back door as casually as a broom. Then, the modern firearms industry finally caught up with it anyway. Marlin went bankrupt in 2007, was absorbed by Remington's parent company, and when that company collapsed into bankruptcy in 2020, the Marlin name and tooling were auctioned off and bought by Ruger. The 39A briefly vanished from production, a piece of 19th century engineering that outlived 3 corporate owners before nearly disappearing in the 21st. The Colt model 1903. Pocket hammerless was the gentleman's quiet companion. Designed by John Moses Browning, it had no exposed hammer to snag on a coat lining, just smooth blued steel that drew clean from a pocket or a purse. Chambered in .32 ACP, it became the most respectable concealed handgun in the country. Bankers carried it, generals carried it too, George Patton among them. In countless homes, it lived in the nightstand, a discreet guardian for a woman alone while her husband traveled. Colt built nearly 600,000 between 1903 and 1945, when bulkier double-stack pistols took over after the war. The gentle little Colt was retired without ceremony, one of the most graceful handguns America ever made, and one of the most forgotten. Number 21 brings the family revolver into the atomic age, the high-standard Sentinel. Introduced in the 1950s with a lightweight aluminum frame and a 9-round .22 cylinder, it was modern, affordable, and easy enough that anyone in the household could shoot it well. A young couple in a brand new suburban ranch house could buy one for under $40 and feel ready for whatever the night might bring. High Standard's reputation for excellent target pistols gave the Sentinel real credibility. It sat in the junk drawer next to the flashlight, the practical guardian of the post-war dream. But High Standard struggled through the decades, changed hands, and eventually vanished from the market entirely, taking the Sentinel with it. Here is where this story has to slow down, because everything up to this point happened because of a single piece of paper that arrived in the mail. In November of 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald answered an advertisement in a gun magazine and mailed in $19.95 for a surplus Italian military rifle. That rifle, an Italian Carcano, ended up on the 6th floor of a Dallas book depository. 5 years later, after Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy were both killed within 9 weeks of each other, the public's patience with the open gun catalog finally ran out. On October 22, 1968, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Gun Control Act, and with one signature, the era of ordering a loaded firearm straight to your front door ended. Every gun on this list, built before that date, had once been available the same way Oswald got his rifle: an ad, an envelope, a wait by the mailbox. Here's the part almost nobody connects to any of this. In September of 2025, when investigators tried to trace the rifle used in the killing of activist Charlie Kirk, they hit a wall. The weapon, a decades-old bolt-action design, predated the very serial number requirements that 1968 law had created, meaning it had likely entered the country long before that law existed and simply never left circulation. 62 years after Oswald's mail-order rifle rewrote American gun law, an equally old, untraceable rifle was sitting in an evidence bag, proof that some of these vanished guns never actually vanished. They just stopped being visible. With that sitting underneath everything else on this list, let's keep counting down, starting with the guns that lived inside the houses, not just inside the mailbox. Number 20 is the Mossberg bolt-action .22, sold as the Model 44, the 144, and the 42 through the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, the workhorse nobody ever bragged about. This was the rifle a father bought when money was tight and the henhouse still needed defending. It handled small pests, and in the worst case, stood by the door, like everything else here. Mossberg eventually moved its attention toward the shotguns that built the brand's lasting reputation, and the humble bolt-action point .22 quietly faded out of memory, even though for millions of rural families it had been the first line of defense in the house. Number 19, the Stevens Crackshot, was the boy's first rifle and the household's backup guardian at the same time. A single-shot .22 with a tip-up action. It cost about $4 and stayed in production into the 1930s. Lighter than the favorite and even simpler, it was the rifle a 10-year-old learned to shoot on, and the same rifle his grown father kept oiled by the porch door for the rest of his life. One shot, then reload, a discipline that taught a kid to make the first shot count. It handled small pests around the property, and on a bad night, it was what the family reached for first. When repeaters made single-shot rifles feel quaint, the Crackshot vanished from the catalogs. Here's where the story takes its first real turn, because number 18 wasn't sold by a gunmaker at all. The J.C. Higgins Model 20 was a Sears house brand named according to company law, after a real Sears bookkeeper, and the gun itself was a sleek pump shotgun, actually manufactured by High Standard and sold under the Sears label for a fraction of any name brand price. A family could flip through the same catalog that sold them their stove, circle a shotgun, and have it shipped to the farmhouse weeks later. For the price of a few weeks of groceries, a household had a 12-gauge by the door that could feed a family and settle trouble with a coyote in the same afternoon. When the 1968 law you just heard about banned mail-order firearm sales for good, the Sears gun and the entire idea behind it died overnight. Number 17 rarely gets mentioned in these countdowns, but the Winchester Model 42 deserves a spot. Built from 1933 to 1963, it was a scaled-down version of Winchester's famous Model 12, chambered in the smaller .410 bore instead of a full-sized gauge. That made it lighter with less recoil, and it became the shotgun families bought for smaller framed shooters, including a surprising number of women who wanted something effective at close range without the kick of a 12-gauge. It worked just as well behind an apartment door in a city as on a porch in the country. Collectors now rank the Model 42 among Winchester's most elegant shotguns, yet it remains one of the least remembered guns on this list, overshadowed by the gun it was built to imitate. Number 16, the Colt Police Positive, earned its name from a safety feature nobody else had perfected. The positive lock was a steel bar that physically blocked the firing pin until the trigger was pulled all the way through, meaning the revolver could be carried loaded and even dropped without going off. For a family with small children in the house, that one detail meant everything. Introduced in 1907 and most often chambered in .38, it became the trusted sidearm of police departments nationwide. And wherever the police trusted a gun, families followed. It rode in glove boxes for decades, the revolver a man handed down to his son. When polymer semi-automatics swept the market, the gun that taught America what a genuinely safe revolver felt like simply faded off the shelves. Number 15 might be the smartest home defense gun ever sold, and almost nobody remembers its name today. The Smith & Wesson Safety Hammerless, nicknamed the Lemon Squeezer. It had no exposed hammer at all, and a grip safety built into the backstrap meant it only fired when the shooter held it correctly and squeezed deliberately. A curious child couldn't fire it by accident, nor could a startled hand fumbling for it in the dark. Smith & Wesson built these stop-break revolvers in .32 and .38 from 1887 into 1940, snapping open to dump every casing at once. For a nightstand drawer, nothing felt safer, and families bought them by the hundreds of thousands for exactly that reason. When changing tastes ended the line, one of the cleverest guns ever designed for an American home quietly became one of the most forgotten. Number 14 is the Smith & Wesson Model 36, better known as the Chief's Special, and the name comes from a genuinely odd bit of trivia. Smith & Wesson actually let police chiefs vote on it at a 1950 law enforcement convention. The gun itself, a small, round-butted .38 Special built on the company's compact J-frame, became the go-to off-duty and backup gun for officers nationwide. And from there, it slid naturally into civilian nightstands as one of the most popular small home defense revolvers of the post-war decades. Light and small, it disappeared easily into a drawer. As larger capacity semi-automatics took over both police holsters and civilian gun safes, the Little Chief's Special slipped quietly out of the conversation, even though it had once been one of the most common handguns in the country. Number 13 is the Colt New Service, the heavy artillery of the family arsenal. A big, deliberate double-action revolver chambered in serious calibers like .45 Colt and .455. This was the gun for the rancher, the lawman, and any household that wanted no doubt about the outcome of a confrontation. Colt built it from 1898 to 1944, serving through 2 world wars, while also sitting in the cabinets of families who lived far from any help. Far from any help, the new service was reassurance you could hold in your own hand. As lighter, cheaper revolvers crowded the market, the mighty new service retired into the gun safes of the few who still understood what it was built for. Number 12 almost didn't make this list because the Colt Cobra spent most of its life living in its more famous sibling's shadow. Introduced in 1950 as a lightweight, aluminum-framed version of the Detective Special, the Cobra weighed several ounces less for the same 6 rounds of .38 Special, and Colt marketed it toward women as a practical purse gun, decades before that kind of marketing became common. It found its way into handbags because it never felt intimidating to hold. As the decades passed, the lightweight snub revolver niche got swallowed by polymer pocket pistols holding twice the ammunition, and the Cobra went out of production, remembered today mostly by collectors chasing the gun's history filed under almost famous. Number 11 is the Ithaca Model 37, a shotgun genuinely built to outlive its owner. Introduced in 1937 with a bottom-ejecting design that sent spent shells straight down instead of out to the side. It worked equally well for left and right-handed shooters and earned a reputation for being almost stubbornly simple. Marketed as the Featherlight, it balanced like a dream and shrugged off decades of abuse in barns, truck beds, and closets. It was the gun a man bought once and willed to his children. Leaning in the corner of the bedroom for the night, something thumped on the porch. As mass-market pumps and cheaper imports flooded in, the meticulously built Ithaca lost ground, and the idea of a family heirloom shotgun became something most households stopped thinking to buy. Before the final 10, there's a piece of advertising history worth pausing on because it explains how seriously these companies took the idea of the safe family gun, and how differently that same advertising would land today. One manufacturer built its entire reputation on a single safety feature, a mechanism that physically prevented the gun from firing unless the trigger was pulled all the way through. To prove it, they ran a print ad showing an actual baby playing with one of their revolvers, daring you to try and make it go off by force alone. Run that exact image past any advertising standards board today, and it wouldn't survive the first meeting. That single ad and the gun behind it turned an obscure Massachusetts manufacturer into the maker of what eventually became the single most common handgun inside an American home. You'll meet it again at the very end. For now, the countdown has 10 guns left, the ones so woven into ordinary life that millions of Americans never thought of them as anything but furniture, until the night they needed them. Number 10. The Marlin Model 336 was the deer rifle that guarded the homestead between hunting seasons. A lever-action chambered in point .30-30 or .35 Remington, introduced in 1948 and descended from designs stretching back to the 1890s, it sat on the rack above the door in a million rural homes. It put venison in the freezer every November, but it stood ready every other month too. Smooth and powerful enough to mean business, the 336 fit the hand of farmers and weekend woodsmen alike. Most never bothered mounting a scope, trusting the same buckhorn sights their fathers used. It was as much a fixture of country life as a pickup truck and a coffee pot, and as tastes shifted toward black rifles and bolt guns, the lever action quietly slipped off center stage, carrying a whole way of living with it. Number 9. The Harrington and Richardson Topper was the gun for the family that had almost nothing left to spend. A single-shot, break-action shotgun selling for as little as $25. It was the cheapest real protection money could buy. You broke it open, dropped in one shell, snapped it shut, and you were ready. No magazine, nothing to fail. For a poor household at the edge of town, the Topper was dignity and security packed into a single barrel. It dealt with the chicken-stealing hawk and the rabid possum, and on a frightening night, it spoke loudly enough to be the final word. H&R built them by the millions across every common gauge. When the company eventually folded, the bargain shotgun that armed America's poorest households lost its maker, and the simplest guardian on this list grew genuinely scarce. Number 8, the Winchester Model 12 was called the perfect repeater, and for 60 years, almost nobody argued with that name. A hammerless pump shotgun introduced in 1912, it was machined from solid steel with a smoothness no modern mass-produced shotgun has quite matched since. Police and soldiers carried it, and families carried the trust of it into their homes, where it stood as the gold standard of the house shotgun for a generation. The sound of a Model 12 being racked was, to millions, the sound of an argument getting settled without another word said. Winchester built around 2 million before rising labor costs ended production in 1964, simply too expensive to keep making the right way. Cheaper pumps replaced it on shelves, but never in the hearts of the men who'd carried one. Number 7 is the gun that, depending on who you ask, never actually left, the Colt Single Action Army. The 1873 Peacemaker, chambered in .45 Colt, armed cavalry troopers, marshals, and homesteaders, and long after the frontier closed, It kept hanging in holsters by countless back doors. It was nearly indestructible and so iconic that the mere sight of it carried weight on its own. Colt actually stopped first-generation production in 1941, convinced the world had moved past it, only to bring it roaring back in 1956, once Western films made every boy in the country want one again. It was always more than a tool, a piece of the country's own self-image that families kept oiled and ready, just in case. Number 6. The Stevens Model 311 was the double-barreled heart of the American farmhouse. A side-by-side shotgun with 2 triggers, built by Stevens and later Savage starting in the 1930s. It was affordable, nearly indestructible, and instantly understood by anyone who picked it up. 2 shells, no mechanism to jam, and a silhouette that told a trespasser everything he needed to know. It hung in mudrooms and bedroom corners across rural America. This classic coach gun was the gun a homeowner reached for first because it never let him down. As pump and semi-automatic shotguns took over and cheap imports undercut the price, the honest American double gun lost its place, and the simple 2-barreled reassurance it offered disappeared with it. Number 5. The Winchester Model 1897 was the pump shotgun that wrote the rules everyone else followed afterward. Designed by John Browning with an exposed hammer you could actually see and trust, it earned battlefield fame as a trench gun in the First World War, but its real career happened at home. Built from 1897 to 1957, it stood guard in farmhouses, country stores, and city apartments nationwide. It had one famous trick. An experienced hand could hold the trigger down and work the slide to empty it as fast as the pump could move, an answer that didn't invite follow-up questions. When streamlined, hammerless shotguns made the old 1897 look dated, Winchester let it go, and the gun that defined an entire category of fighting pump shotgun quietly aged out of the American home. Number 4. The Colt Detective Special packed a serious revolver into a genuinely small package. Introduced in 1927 as a 6-shot .38 with the barrel cut to 2 inches, it was a true snub-nose, built for a coat pocket and a bedside table at the same time. Detectives carried it, which gave the gun its name, but ordinary families adopted it just as quickly. It was small enough for a woman's purse, light enough to forget you were carrying it, and powerful enough to matter. They hid in nightstands and glove compartments across the country for decades. When polymer pocket pistols arrived holding twice the rounds for half the price, the elegant little snub revolver slowly vanished from the gun shop counter for good. Number 3 is the most produced centerfire revolver design in human history, and for good reason, the Smith & Wesson Model 10, also known as the Military and Police. Introduced in 1899 and chambered in .38 Special, more than 6 million left the factory floor over the following century. It armed police on nearly every continent and served in every American war of that era, then came home too. The Model 10 was the revolver every other revolver got measured against. Reliable, accurate, and simple enough to trust your life to without thinking twice. It was the gun a retired officer kept by the bed, the same gun handed down to a daughter heading off on her own. When America pictured a revolver, this is the gun it pictured. Yet even this king eventually fell, as police and the public shifted toward high-capacity semi-automatics through the 1990s, and demand collapsed almost completely. Number 2 is, by most measures, the most American rifle ever built, and it lived as much beside the back door as out in the deer woods. The Winchester Model 1894. Designed by John Browning and chambered in the legendary point 30-30, more than 7 million were produced before the original run ended in 2006. It was the lever action of the cowboy, and just as easily the lever action of the suburb, the rifle a man learned from his father and taught to his own kids. Slim and fast, it carried easily across a saddle, in a truck cab, or slung over an arm on the walk to the back 40. For more than a century, it stood as the default long gun of the American household. When the company finally shut its New Haven plant, the country lost more than just a rifle. It lost a steel thread that had run through generations of American homes without most people ever noticing it was there. And that brings us to number 1, the gun behind that controversial baby advertisement from earlier, the Iver Johnson Safety Automatic. For decades, this was, by sheer numbers, the single most common handgun inside an American home, sitting in more nightstand drawers than anything else ever manufactured in this country. A top-break revolver in .32 or .38, it ejected all its spent shells at once and sold through every catalog and hardware store in the land for around $5. Its real genius was the transfer bar safety system, the mechanism that made the gun physically incapable of firing unless the trigger was pulled completely through, the very feature that ad campaign was built around. For a family with small children, that promise was priceless, and millions trusted it for exactly that reason. It was cheap, safe by design, and absolutely everywhere. Then the same 1968 Gun Control Act that ended Oswald-style mail-order rifles for good also crushed the entire market for the inexpensive home revolver overnight. The company faded, and the most trusted family gun in American history quietly vanished from memory, even though it had once sat closer to more American families than almost anything else they owned. So there's the full 30. From the $2 Hopkins and Allen to the Iver Johnson that once sat in something like 10 million drawers, and they all tell the same underlying story. For 100 years, America armed its households the same plain way it bought its tools, until one law and one shift in taste swept the old guardians away, almost all at once. Here's the twist nobody who owned these guns ever saw coming. The same firearms once sold for $2 or $3 or quietly dismissed for decades as cheap and almost embarrassing to admit you owned, have become some of the hottest items in the collector's market right now. Auction houses report record demand for exactly this category of gun. Savage Model 99s, Browning Auto 5 shotguns, and original M1 carbines are climbing in value faster than almost anything else on the floor. And early production Colt revolvers that once sold for a few dollars now regularly bring tens of thousands at auction. The plain revolver your grandfather kept behind the kitchen door might genuinely be worth more today than the car he drove to work in. So before you scroll away, ask the people around you one simple question. Did your own family ever own one of these? There's a real chance the answer is sitting quietly in a closet somewhere right now, completely unaware of what it's actually become.